in a sense, the illusion of stability in social space, if there is one, if you're able to maintain the illusion of stability in social space, it's because the exciting thing that's going on is invisible. And what it is it's the growth of the net. It's the rise of the web, which hour by hour, day by day, is reaching around the planet deeper and deeper and deeper. The number of people getting email has doubled every 6 months for the last 5 years. It's doubled every 6 months. If this goes on at the current rate, every man, woman, and child on the planet will have email before the year 2000. And of course, there's nothing to see. There's nothing to touch. I mean, there's some appliances involved, but they're quiet and in the background. And yet, what it is that the human neural net, the unconscious of the species, is actually being hardwired as an artifact. We're pouring glass and gold and silicon down the microtubules of the racial imagination, and as it were, making a kind of casting of the state of the human imagination at the close of the millennium. And to what degree this imaging of ourselves in silicon will ever reach a limit is hard to tell. I mean, we've begun with the past. We're archiving it, we're virtualizing it, we're creating databases that allow us to stroll around in it. But more and more time will be consumed, and eventually the only choice will be to allow it to flow over into the presence. And, prosthesis is already practically a way of life. What's coming is very hard to imagine. And Prigozhin, to loop one of these concerns back to another, Prigozhin got his start studying traffic theory on freeways. Well, it's now thought by the complexity people that when you get somewhere above 6 to the 9th entities operating in an environment of connectivity, that you get, and now we switch philosophers and vocabularies, what David Bohm called emergent properties, and what you and I would call anybody's guess. I mean, that's what an emergent property is. It means something utterly unexpected, something completely unexpected. For example, I mean, he used very simple examples. For example, if you have 5 gold atoms, you don't have the color yellow. You don't get that until you have hundreds of gold atoms. That color is an emergent property. It requires a large number of gold atoms for the fact that gold is yellow to begin to be part of the picture. Similarly, wetness. If you have a water molecule, it is not wet in any sense that you can relate to. Wetness is a property of thousands of water molecules. It's an emergent property. And so there's obviously nothing magical about this, unless you happen to be conscious at one of these phase transitions and you actually see an emergent property come out of a species. And clearly what we are trying to do is overcome our differences. Our thing is a curious dichotomy between our individuality and our drive toward community. And technology is facilitating the drive toward community at this incredibly accelerated rate. Traffic is accelerating. And, my enthusiasm for psychedelic states of mind, I see simply as a kind of aboriginal precognitive anticipation of this state of electronic data fusion and information transparency that is being put in place. Essentially what we're doing is we're realizing our cultural ideals whether we're conscious of them or not. And one of our cultural ideals is agape, Christian love, or transparent telepathic sharing. And so our technology becomes this, I mean, that's why we invented printing presses and clear windows and lingerie and the computer, and all of these things facilitate.
You think that, everybody's reading the Celestine prophecy. What do you think about that? I think that's goes right in line with what you just said.
Well, O. Henry said, never read a book till it's 5 years old. And I don't always follow his advice, but in the case of the Celestine prophecy, I'm kind of weird. I was very embarrassed a week ago or 10 days ago. I was in New York City, and I was with some friends of mine who were in a rock and roll band, and they were on the Letterman show. So I went with them to the Letterman show for the taping of the show. It was the Spin Doctors. And I had never seen the Letterman show. So I kept saying to people, is that Letterman? The janitor would go by. And then, because we were there an hour ahead of time. So I'm not very au courant with these cultural icons. I wish the author of the Celestine prophecy, he, she, them, or it, whoever it may be, good luck. A he. But I do, if what I've been able to glean from the ether about the Celestine prophecy is that it is a species of anticipatory, visionary breakthrough, right? Saying that the world is going to change beyond our possibility of recognizing it. I think this is absolutely true. The details are where it gets tricky. Part of my notion of how we should all behave as we move toward this attractor or this transcendental object that is the telos of the historical process is to just try and spread calm and good vibes so that people, it's like a roller coaster, the sign which says, do not stand up. People should not just keep your mouth shut, keep your hands on the handlebars, and, you can yell your head off if you want, but do not stand up, please. Just a word about this, to the immense boredom of half the people in the room who've heard me say this before, but this question about anticipations of the millennium, the way I think of it is that huge events have a kind of backwash into the past. They are not cleanly divided from the time which precedes them, so that before they happen, you can almost feel the certitude of their arrival. And so this thing that lies ahead of us now, not very far in the historical continuum, is the grandmother of all of this kind of thing. And social theories, philosophers, psychedelic trips, visions had in the desert, all of these things will just organize themselves like iron filings around the presence of this object ahead of us in time. And so, in a sense, all of history is an anticipation of the end of history. And the closer you get to the end of history, the clearer the anticipations become. So, when you're 2,000 years from it, it's something about how God and man will be fused in one body, and a Messiah will take a chosen people into a land of milk and honey. And that's the best anybody could do. That's the clearest image anybody could get of what the deal was. So then circa 1948, you're up to, the Rigelians will come with enormous ships and advanced medical techniques and teach us how to clean up our earth and love one another and grow food from the sea and so forth and so on. Turns out, no, that isn't it either. And and as we get closer, the amount of prophetistic speculation is just going to grow exponentially, because all the old systems of thought are failing. And all the old systems of thought are capable of doing is denying the obvious, which is that the earth is on the brink of the greatest change since the end of the Mesozoic, you know? But people don't like to think about that, because all they can think about is, the possibility of personal extinction. Technology, religion, psychedelic drugs, archaeology that could at any moment spew something out of the ground that would completely scramble everybody's notion of what really did go on or something. And I'm not a face on Mars guy or some malarkey like that. Let me make that clear. But still, you have to be open to the fact that something might come along. Well, what else do we want to say about that? Let me see if I covered my list. I think we were talking about the nets and the webs. This collectivity that is coming into being is coming into existence more rapidly than anyone can chart or clock or understand. I have a protocol that goes on in the middle of the night and searches databases all over the world for keywords of interest to me. And when I get up in the morning, these files are just stacked on the screen, ready to be gone through. And, it can be trivial, but it could be, a heresy, a Greek Orthodox heresy of interest to fully a dozen people on the planet. And, if the information is out there, the computer will eventually winnow and winnow and winnow, because it is so tireless and so deeply dedicated to my wishes. I mean, what else does it have to do? It doesn't know.
What's the word?
Well, the word I was thinking of is Mandaean, which is a religious cult that I'm interested in that's existed continuously for about 2,800 years. Mandaean. And they now are down to a few hundred people in the swamps of Iran and Iraq. And I wonder about the state of their community. I wonder how they came through the Gulf War. I wonder if they were able to preserve their very strict kosher laws and a bunch of other things. And you may wonder, why do I care about this? I have a lot on my menu. Well, they had, by kosher, I mean they had rules as a religious community that would be almost impossible to follow in the 20th century. For instance, one of their rules was that if your eye fell on a non-believer, if you were a Mandaean and your eye fell on a non-believer, then you had to have 6 days of purification. Well, since there are only a few hundred Mandaeans on this planet, it was tough to not occasionally encounter a non-believer, you can imagine. So then huge amounts of community time and energy were being taken up in these ritual ablutions and cleansings to try and make it okay. And I wonder how they fare under Saddam Hussein. Well, so then you go onto the net and program this word, and you discover that in Pennsylvania there's a committee of people who are concerned about the Mandaean community, and then in Germany there's some people who are preserving Mandaean liturgy, and at the University of Heidelberg there's a guy who can read the books, and it's just, Tim Leary said a wonderful thing years and years ago. He said, find the others. Find the others. And the computer is the tool for finding the others. And it was never intended for folks like you and me. It's one of these things that fell off the military vehicle as it rumbled by. and we peasants pulled it out of the bushes and discovered what you could do with this thing. But you can find the others. There are hundreds and hundreds of conferences going on Usenet, and if it's a work of literature, if it's a sexual preference, if it's a complex programming problem, if it's an issue of historical research or diet or anything else, there are 50 or 60 people just waiting to talk to you about this. So, I sort of believe that the psychedelic revolution is beginning to bear fruit, and that we shouldn't have thought of it as the 60s revolution. We should have thought of it as the 30 Years' War. And, victory is now within sight. No one can run or program these vast networks except guys with ponytails. And the suits who are depending on all of this stuff to hold the world together are entirely beholden on, guys with one earring and ponytails and all that. Everything that loathes and revolts them is interposed between them and the technology, because printheads can't hack it. Literally, they can't hack it. And as Thomas Kuhn said in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, the way you really make revolutions is by waiting for the old guard to die off. And they are dying off. And then the synergy that comes from all of these fields melting together. I mean, it is like, my intuition was always that the psychedelic experience was a fractal anticipation of human history. That it starts out the same way, everything's normal, you're just cooking your food around the fire, and then it builds, and then there's structure, and then dissolution of structure, and then technical accretions, and vast downloading of ideas, and so forth and so on. And it's happening. I mean, the unitary mind is being created. It is, in fact, in existence. The autonomic functions of the human superorganism are already in place. And what do I mean by the autonomic functions? I mean the daily pricing of gold, the computer transactions that characterize the banking system. This is all going on all the time. Machines are talking to machines, moving billions of dollars around, setting the values of currency and precious metals and commodity. I mean, most of this is on automatic. Human operators are only called in when unexpected fluctuations are picked up inside the system. And yet it's not clear, what is being maximized. The topmost level of control is only assumed to exist. This is very exciting. We all assume that if you follow these trees of control up and up, finally at the level of the IMF, the World Bank, the National Security Council, someone is running it. But it's actually not true. It isn't a tree. It doesn't lead to focal nexus of control. It's a net. It's a web. And, when you realize this, you realize that a very large amount of power is in your hands. The people in this room, even if a couple of homeless have crept in here this evening, which is not likely, the people in this room probably represent the upper 5% of the most powerful manipulators on the planet. Because if you just have a telephone credit card, you're in the upper 10% of the powerful manipulators of information on the planet. Yeah, a calling card. And if you own a power book and an email address, you are a member of the 20 million elite that is running the planet through the cybernet. And talking to those people, changing their minds, interacting with them is the way to steer it. And they are not the suits. They are not the guys chewing the black cigars. They're a much more malleable and open crowd. crowd. It's hard to pass a capitalist dominator through the keyhole of cyberspace. You have to be young and lean and mean, tattoos help, that sort of thing.